Thank you. Hi, I'm Dorota. I'm the CEO at Authoress, which lets you easily add login and access control into your software. And security is a big topic for us. So let's talk about return on investment in security. First, I'm curious, who in the audience thinks that your company is investing enough in security? Could we get a show of hands? I see. Well, globally, on average, companies spend up to 20% of their IT budget on security. If we were to represent this in terms of software engineers, imagine that for every 10 engineers you hire, one or two would be solely full-time dedicated to security. That seems like a lot. Then why do we feel like it's not enough? What does investing in security really buy us? Throughout the talk, I'll keep saying investing, and I have to acknowledge that it is a bit of a misnomer, because security is one of those things where you can put in a lot of time, a lot of money, and the best outcome you can possibly hope for is that nothing happens. What kind of investment is that? It's not really. So when I say invest in security, what I mean is invest in protecting ourselves from a risk of a security incident. And risk is the operative word here. So if we want to understand where our security budget should go, we need to quantify the risks involved. And there are two parts to every risk. There is the impact. What's the worst that can happen? What do we stand to lose? And this can be expressed in monetary terms. So revenue loss, cost of dealing with the fallout. And then there is probability. How likely is it that the worst will come to pass? We don't know. We don't have a crystal ball, but we can make an educated guess. The two of them together, when we multiply them, we get expected value, which represents the average outcome of a given mishap. And once we have the expected value, we can do all sorts of cool things with it. We can use it to prioritize. We can go over our threat model, because all of us who work with security, we all have a threat model, right? We can go over a threat model and stack rank items based on the expected value of each risk. Or we can take it further. We can look at our mitigations, our solutions, see how much each costs, and how it affects the expected value. And this will tell us exactly which one has the best return. So let's do an example. Something that should be in everyone's threat model: customer data exfiltration. One day, you may find that the personal information of your customers from your internal systems is for sale somewhere on the dark web. Let's start with the probability. How likely is it that your company will leak your customers' data in the next 12 months? To get to a number, let's look at some statistics first. Last year alone, 2023, over 300 million accounts have been breached. 300 million. That's like 2/3 of all EU citizens, or the whole population of Eastern Europe, and then some. A lot of accounts. But only 1 in 5 of known breaches become public knowledge. We don't hear about all of them. Now, this talks about breaches, which is the most severe form where the attackers have access to manipulate the data. When we talk about leaks, when we simply expose data to unauthorized people, we actually have no clue how often they happen. On one hand, they remain undetected for significant periods of times. And even if they are detected, they're just massively, massively underreported. In a few minutes, we'll all see why. Okay, so there's some gaps in the data. What else do we know? Company size doesn't matter all that much. So revenue, headcount, even on a micro scale, you're already likely to be targeted. On the other hand, where you operate matters quite a bit. If you have customers in the US or Russia, you're way, way more likely to be targeted. I wonder why. Okay, probability. My personal, very, very conservative estimate is that for the companies represented here in this room, on average, the chances that you will leak your customers' data in the next year are 30 to 40%. Is that a lot? It's quite a bit. Scary. And I'm being super optimistic here. Okay, so we have probability up to 40%. Let's talk about the impact. What happens when we leak our customers' data? How much does it cost us? Depending on our jurisdiction, we may to notify everyone and involve the authorities. So we'll be sending a bunch of emails. That doesn't cost a lot. Negligible. Oh, but if we tell people we lost control of the data, they may not like us anymore. They may lose trust in our brand. Our reputation may suffer. How can we put a number on a reputation? It's hard. Damage to our brand appears so hard to estimate that many companies don't even try. They just give up. Our reputation is priceless. Well, if we assume that, then we're looking at a very, very high expected value because probability is fairly high, up to 40%. If our reputation is priceless, then the expected value is infinite. We may lose everything, right? We can do better. We can actually try and take a stab at estimating the real impact here. And to do that, we have a few options. One is, if we know our customers really, really well, we may be able to predict how they will react when we leak their data. This is fairly rare. Most companies notoriously misjudge the customer's behavior. Another option we have is to look at the history of similar incidents. Look at what they did to affected companies and how it evolved over time. Or we could take a shortcut. We could look at the work that was already done by smart people who analyzed this historical data for us. There's been a research published a few years ago in Journal of Cybersecurity on this exact topic. Impact of security incidents on brand value. And the research concludes, interestingly, in that for average incidents, the brand value increases. And if we end up in the news, and the news coverage is neutral, our sales will improve. Having a security incident can be good for business. Are we surprised? I was. But if you think about it, when we talk about average incidents, so we lose some email addresses, phone numbers, unless we completely botch our messaging, an incident is an opportunity for us to tell our customers just how much we care about protecting the data. So they trust us more. And if someone never heard of us and they read a news article, it acts as an advertisement. So it turns out our customers maybe don't care all that much. Although it does change quite a bit when we talk about severe incidents. So when the data involved is particularly sensitive or it's some sort of spectacular flop, we may lose up to 9% of our brand value. Now this effect dissipates fairly quickly because people forget, unless there's also negative news coverage, in which case it will have a lasting negative impact on our future sales. So we have impact, we have probability. Let's calculate the expected value. Best case, we're talking about average incidents. We gain over 11% of our total brand value as a result. Now, in the real world, we can't take brand value and say, hey, this is our annual revenue. But for this analysis, it's a perfect proxy. We can just use it as that. It's good enough. So 11% of our total annual revenue we gain. Best case. Worst case, we lose almost 4% of our total annual revenue. If we average these out, we're looking at an expected value equal between 5 to 9% of our total annual revenue. Net positive. On average, this is a good business outcome. When we leak our customers' data, we can expect, on average, a good business outcome. So what does it tell us? Well, if we have other items in our threat model, we should probably look at those first, because we don't want to be spending time or money on trying to prevent a good business outcome. Next, if we only looked at the probability and didn't bother estimating the impact, we would have reached wrong conclusions. And lastly, the only thing that is worth any money here in this situation is mitigating the impact so that we reduce the severity of an incident from a severe down to average, not more. That's the only thing that is worth investing in here. So let's talk about solutions for mitigating the risk of customer data exfiltration. While we keep in mind that we probably don't want to be spending too much money because the average outcome is good for the business. Okay, so easiest thing anyone can do is to draft a policy document saying that we're committed to protecting our users' data. We will not be sharing our passwords. We will not be storing them in plain text on a non-secure server, yada, yada. Have every employee sign it, done. We're secure. If we're smart, we're also going to look at the attack vectors. And two most common attack vectors here are phishing and credential theft. So we could do a phishing awareness training for everyone, or enforce single sign-on and multi-factor authentication everywhere. Now, so far, all of these options work on reducing the likelihood of a successful attack, which means we're reducing a probability of a good business outcome as well as a bad one. Even though these are on the cheaper side, they really don't have a good return. So what else do we have? What else can we do? We could encrypt everything. Use encryption in transit and at rest, so that if we leak the data, it's encrypted. Unless your software is really ancient, or you made some really questionable technology choices, you should be able to get this one almost for free nowadays. So, cheap, works on the impact. This one has a very good return. What else do we have? What can we do to mitigate the impact? Anything that lets us to isolate or sequester the data so that if we lose some of it, we don't lose everything. So things like data sharding, object level authorization, access control with fine-grained permissions and least privileged access for everyone on every service, modular architecture, zero trust. We have a lot of options. And what do all of these options have in common? Depending on when we're introducing these measures, they can be either super, super cheap or prohibitively expensive. When we consider data sharding or object level authorization as we're writing our software, they become just another trade-off. We can get it almost for free. But if we consider it after the fact, because we think security is an operations concern, then we're looking at a very fun and very long migration project. And same goes for least privileged access or zero trust. When we consider these options as we're building out our infrastructure or selecting our third-party vendors, it's fairly easy to get these in. But if we wait until after the fact, after we have already something running and it doesn't follow these principles, it's difficult. A lot of work, may not even be possible. And those of you who have done a migration of this sort, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So far, we have a bunch of options that don't have a good return, one that appears to be a quick win, very good return on this one, and a bunch of options that could have an excellent return if we thought about them at the right time. Chances are we haven't, and now they are more expensive than the expected value of the risk we're trying to mitigate. And at this point, we really need to look at the elephant in the room. Why bother? Why should we do anything? If the average outcome of a customer data leak is good for the business, we should just let it happen. Look the other way. And if somehow someone finds out, oops, we're so sorry, but we care about your data. That's why regulations exist. Well, if you operate in the European Union, you're subject to GDPR and Digital Services Act, which put every company under obligation to protect their customers' data. Companies that fail to do so can be fined up to 10 million euros or 2% of their global annual turnover. That's a lot of money. Should be a good deterrent, right? Except actual fines are never really this big. For bigger companies and multiple egregious offenses, they may pay a few million. More often, it's a few 100,000 or a few thousand for smaller companies or first offenses. If you're curious, you can go to enforcementtracker.com, which lists the fines that companies pay for violating the privacy regulations. It's fascinating. Oh, by the way, those fines can be insured against. So, in practice, not doing anything to prevent customer data leak, no matter how unethical, is an attractive option for the business. This looks a little bit different if you are in Switzerland. In here, we have new Federal Act on Data Protection, which is fairly similar to GDPR with one crucial difference. Companies that fail to comply can be fined up to 0 Swiss francs? What? Well, Switzerland, as one of the first countries in the world, made the decision not to prosecute the companies because we see it doesn't really work. Switzerland prosecutes individuals. So, as a Swiss executive, if I say in a meeting, preventing a data leak is a poor investment, let's not do it, I am putting my own personal money on the line. If something happens and the investigation finds that I made an intentional decision to ignore the problem, I can be fined up to 250,000 Swiss francs out of my own pocket. Company can't bail me out, can't be insured against. I'm going to think twice. Except, if I am that executive who thinks protecting our users' data is not worth it, all I'm going to do is to find the cheapest option that proves we did something and provides an excellent cover for my dark soul. We're going to draft that policy document. And this is how a lot of security theater happens. We do things that don't require a lot of effort, but they make us seem like we care, like we're doing something. We tick the necessary boxes, we cover dark souls. Now, as I was talking, I could see some of you squirming in your chairs. All of it is uncomfortable, but it is our reality. If you are in this room, chances are that at least once in your career, you have tried to convince your leadership to implement a security practice and received pushback. Now you understand why. The example we just did is probably the most extreme there is, but as you go over your threat model, you may find other areas where implementing proper security in your situation makes no monetary sense. Anything that has to do with production downtime, so DDoS attacks, ransomware, and whatnot, those tend to have very high expected value, so should be prime candidates for investing our security budget. But production downtime can be insured against, whereas adding protection requires you to do work. If you didn't think about security until your system is in production, guess which one is cheaper? And this brings us to the newest trend we see in software development: insurance-driven security. This is when your insurance company tells you which security practices to put in place before they cover you. And guess what? Insurance companies aren't necessarily experts in software or in security. So a lot of what gets prescribed ends up as security theater, documentation, ticking checkboxes, covering our dark souls. And this is how we may end up spending up to 20% of our IT budget on security, yet it doesn't really feel like it's enough. So is proper security simply too expensive? Businesses will not invest in security if it's hard to perceive the value it brings. And sometimes there is no direct value if our customers don't care. But this equation changes drastically if we consider securing the thing as we're building it. When we're writing our software, designing our architecture, building out our infrastructure, we make a lot of trade-offs. If we add security to the mix then, it becomes just another trade-off. It doesn't make our software any more expensive. And security we can get for free yields an excellent return. So, what should we do about all of it? As poor DevOps folks. Well, at the very least, we can do the analysis, calculate the expected value, and look at your solutions, your mitigations, find the quick wins, those with good return. Figure out which gives you more leverage, reducing the probability or reducing the impact. But first and foremost, we should really try and make security everyone's concern. So whenever something new is added, new piece of software, new tool, new piece of infrastructure, talk to whoever's involved in that decision. Invite yourself to meetings if necessary. Because contrary to popular opinion, security is not an operations concern. It's a software development concern. And if we leave it till operations, we'll be stuck with insurance-driven security. Well, thank you.